I talk about personal style a lot on this channel. It's something that I turn to over and over and over again in my life as a tool for getting to know myself and understanding myself. It's a reflective process. It's a very internal, introspective process of asking questions and answering them for yourself and understanding who you are and what you like and why you like something and what that says about you. And ultimately, for me, it's been one of the major ways throughout my life that I have come to understand myself. And the kind of flip side of that is, turning around and using personal style and using that understanding of yourself to communicate something to other people through your aesthetic expression of yourself. Now, I also spend a lot of time doing character development for my novels. And there's a connection here. I promise I'm going to connect these dots, so just bear with me. Really, the process of character development is understanding other people. In the context of fiction, it's understanding fictional, made-up, imaginary people, but it's still the process of getting to know who those people are. Because it goes so far beyond just oh, what's their job? What color hair do they have? How tall are they? It's really good, comprehensive character development is really understanding what a person's background is, what was their childhood like, what motivates them, what are their values, what are their interests, what do they hate, what kinds of things are they drawn to in other people and why. It's all of this nuance of what makes a person a complicated, complex, interesting, complete person. And because I spend so much time doing both of those things, they've over time started to kind of mesh together. And somewhere along the way, I started using personal style and that same process I use for understanding my own personal style to understand my fictional characters. I would literally be on the internet and see a picture of an outfit and think oh, that's not my style, but that's this character's style. And I would want to record that somewhere. And so I started making these Pinterest boards for my book characters. And I would just add reference material to those Pinterest boards of things that felt like it's what my characters would wear. It's how they would dress. It's the kind of clothes that they would own and the way that they would style them. And it's ended up being one of the first things I do when I'm planning and prepping for a new writing project. And so I thought I would walk you through some of those Pinterest boards and kind of show you what my approach is, what my process is, how I kind of combine these practices of personal style and taste development and character development to create really well-rounded, complex fictional characters that I get to write books about. So if we reverse engineer this idea that personal style is a way to communicate something about yourself, that means we can also use it to communicate something about other people. Obviously, this doesn't work in a real life context. I'm not going to be dressing other people and communicating things for them. But in a fictional context, I very literally am doing that. I am very literally going to be making up what people look like and how they dress and what they wear. And if I do that strategically, I can use that as a way to communicate something to a reader about that person. I will literally go pull specific outfits from that reference library and describe that as what they're wearing. But even more than the very literal application of this, there is also so much to be gained as a writer in terms of forcing yourself to think through and understand what your characters like and why they like those things. So in my first book, for example, the main character is a really funny, playful person. She doesn't take anything in life too seriously, sometimes to her own detriment, sometimes to the detriment of others. And she's also at a point in her life where she's a little bit lost. Like, she's really grappling with her identity, with her sense of self, what she wants out of life, where she's going. And I think the same way that we might kind of dabble in different interests or hobbies or careers as a way to figure out what it is we do want, I thought she would be the kind of person that would experiment with clothes in that same way, where she's really like trying one thing and seeing how it feels, and trying something totally different and seeing how that feels. And then sometimes combining those things that feel really unexpected and like they might not go together, but she's just gonna try it and see what happens. And so the reference material that I collected for her is, I think it really reflects that. There's this sense of a person just really exploring all of the available options. For the place that she is in her life, in this book, it's like the perfect external representation of her internal emotional state. The very first outfit we see her in, the beginning of the book, is a pair of bike shorts, a novelty souvenir t-shirt that says, "I got crabs in Maryland," and a pair of hand-me-down cowboy boots that she inherited from an aunt. It's like an inherently chaotic, ridiculous outfit that she chooses to wear out in public. And then after choosing to wear this outfit out in public, she's immediately embarrassed by how she looks as soon as she runs into somebody that she knows. And just within that, like, one outfit, I think we're saying so much about a character. With the t-shirt, she's the kind of person, she's like a little bit impulsive. She probably saw that on a trip or maybe even in like a thrift store and thought it was funny and got swept up in the moment and just bought it and didn't think about it. And the bike shorts are something that, like, they're athletic wear, but she's not using them in that intended context. She's wearing them as just like normal clothes because she doesn't have her life together, and she's definitely not the kind of person who's going to like wake up early and go for a 20-mile bike ride. And then even the cowboy boots are, like, in this context, very impractical. She could have picked a pair of sandals, a pair of sneakers, something that feels like the thing you would throw on if you were just gonna run out really quickly. But she's not a very practical person. She's not pragmatic. She's not stopping long enough to think about what the most obvious thing to do is. She's just kind of like reacting and going with the first thing that she encounters. And even though that outfit isn't pulled directly from anything specific in this reference library, you can feel that same kind of like spirit in a lot of these clothes. At the very least, just in terms of like the combinations of things. You know, we have like a little strappy tank top with this like super puffy, oversized blue bomber jacket, or a pair of like vintage nylon running shorts with an oversized like leather aviator jacket and a pair of ballet flats, or literally a pair of sweatpants and a cardigan with a pair of like heavily embellished Manolo Blahnik flats. So it's these things that have that same kind of energy where it feels like someone literally just pulled random things out of their closet, threw them on, and just like went with it. And ultimately the effect of outfits like that, I think what it's communicating about the character is this sense of impulsivity. I also really wanted to play with the idea of her being chronically over or underdressed. And the thinking behind that was that, you know, she's a character who is currently feeling very out of place in her own environment. She's just moved back to her hometown. She doesn't want to be there. She feels uncomfortable. She feels like this is not the right environment for her to be in. So I wanted to communicate that visually and aesthetically through her personal style. And like every event she goes to, she's either way underdressed or way overdressed. Not necessarily even in like a formal, casual sense, although definitely sometimes. But there's almost this feeling of her like playing dress up. Like she'll go meet up with a former classmate from high school and wear a shirt with a bunch of feathers on it and like a pair of metallic mules. And it's not even that that's like not a good outfit. I happen to think It's something I would wear. I happen to think it's kind of a cool outfit, but in this context, it definitely gives that feeling that she's playing dress up. She's not taking anything seriously, and she's definitely not dressing the same way as the other people around her. She's not gonna wear like a normal pair of sunglasses. She's going to wear a pair of sunglasses with rhinestones on them and a really over-the-top, colorful striped scarf. She's not gonna wear a pair of sneakers with like running shorts and a t-shirt. She's, for some reason, going to reach for a pair of heels because it feels more fun. Now, the only exceptions to this rule are a couple of outfits, including this one, which is just like denim shorts, a navy blue sweater, and a pair of Converse. And this was an outfit that I wanted to include both in the reference library and literally in the book. And it comes up kind of around the halfway point where the character starts to settle into her life, and you don't have this like constant sense of tension and this constant feeling that she doesn't want to be where she is. And you see her start to kind of settle into a pace and a rhythm and get a little bit more comfortable with herself and who she is and this point in life that she's currently at. And with that sort of ease and relaxation of her mental emotional state, I wanted to reflect that in her clothes and give her something that feels comfortable and easy and like you're gonna turn to it over and over again, and there's a familiarity to it and a warmth to it. The last thing I'm gonna point out about this particular reference library is that I wanted this character to wear a lot of vintage clothes. One, because I think she's the kind of person who would be drawn to novelty, and there's so much novelty in vintage shopping. Like that's where you're gonna find a random one of funny graphic t-shirt that nobody else has. But the other reason I wanted her to wear a lot of vintage is that she does not have any money. She's very broke. She doesn't have money to spend on fancy, nice designer clothes. She's definitely going to be shopping at thrift stores and buying inexpensive things that she can afford. So there's also like kind of a biographical detail that we can glean from that, just in terms of her like current socioeconomic standing. On the flip side, for my second book, I also have a character who wears a lot of vintage clothes, but he wears them for very different reasons. He's not wearing vintage out of a sense of novelty or affordability. He is wearing vintage because he's the kind of person who believes that everything used to be made better. Clothes were better, furniture was better, everything was better. And so he's the kind of person who's like willing to buy expensive vintage because he just like believes in it philosophically. He is also the kind of person to be incredibly particular about his things and probably spend a lot of time debating every single purchase he makes, and therefore feels very attached to every single thing he owns. So I think he has more of a like collector mindset, and I really wanted that particularity to come through. I wanted it to feel like he was really interested in this idea of his style as kind of like a design ethos. But I also felt like there was some risk there in that I didn't want him to come across as like uptight or snobby or like overly controlled or restrained or curated. He is like a really warm, sensitive, emotional character. And so I thought a really nice way to kind of balance those two things, that particularity and that warmth, was to look for outfits where it feels like the individual items have been very carefully selected and they're like prized possessions in a way, but they're being worn in a way that's really like loose and casual and undone and not precious. Like, he wouldn't be upset if his favorite t-shirt got a little hole in it. He would be excited because it feels more like authentic and real. And where our last character's approach to vintage was like truly all over the place. It's like she literally walked into a vintage store, bought a bunch of things, and never once considered how they were going to go together. He is still very much going to think about like how he's combining things. And I think for this character, vintage is in a way more of a uniform. There's more consistency here in terms of how he styles his vintage pieces, in terms of the type of vintage pieces that he's buying. There's a more consistent color palette. When there is color, it's like a little dash of color, but it's not all color all the time. And then there are some places where I've really intentionally given him consistency. His shoes, for example, I think he probably wears Adidas Sambas. He maybe owns like 2 or 3 different colors, but those are the only shoes he wears. Like those are his sneakers. You're not gonna see him in Vans. You're not gonna see him in Converse. You're not gonna see him in a running shoe. You're going to see him exclusively in Adidas. And I think that consistency is really important in terms of character development because it gives us a sense that he knows who he is. He's done the work at some point earlier in his life that we haven't seen to understand what he likes and why he likes it and end up at this conclusion that this is the kind of sneakers he likes to wear, and he doesn't need to question that anymore. He's not worried about it. He knows that these are the shoes that he likes. There's a real like sense of self and assuredness in that kind of consistency. And so we see like just by comparing these two characters who both wear kind of categorically similar things, that their approach to it is communicating something totally different about where they're at in life. We have one character who's really unclear on who they are, really still in that like exploration phase. And we have another character who is very clear on who he is and what he likes and like very steadfast in that. Now, if we want another point of comparison, this character's younger brother has a very different approach to personal style than either of the characters we've talked about thus far. This character is like very intense. He was maybe like a little bit rough around the edges, especially when he was younger. Like he's the kind of teenager who was constantly getting into trouble, constantly breaking rules, like really does not do well with authority, probably made some questionable choices. And now that he's an adult has like really restrained a lot of those tendencies. And I think for me, that means that his intensity needs an outlet. It needs somewhere to go. And so I think he's the kind of person who would wear like a strict personal uniform. I think he's the kind of person who would get every pair of trousers he wears meticulously tailored. And he would almost always pick trousers over denim. He also buys the exact same white t-shirt. It's the one kind of white t-shirt that he wears. He wears it tucked in and with a belt. Like there's a sense of like literal restriction there that reflects that like very intense, controlled kind of demeanor. And like 90% of the time, that is probably what he wears. He sprinkles in the occasional sweater, the occasional pair of jeans, the occasional jacket or a baseball hat. But even those, I think he would be the kind of person to own like one baseball hat and one sweater and one blazer. And all of those things must fit within that definition of his uniform. I also wanted to make his style a little bit more formal and a little bit more dressed up. He's a very confident character. He lives in a city. He goes out a lot. He dates a lot. He's probably a little bit vain. And like you can tell that he cares about the way he looks. That said, we still have these little moments of him being like kind of rough around the edges with his appearance. His hair isn't like perfectly done. It's always like a little unkempt. I did think Jeremy Allen White was like a perfect kind of persona for this. There's like that real intensity and this kind of like disheveled demeanor at the same time. So obviously like this character's style and personality are totally different from the last one. Their older brother is also, again, very different. He's very much the oldest brother. He has like a very classic, almost traditional sense of style. He is very literally buttoned up, like he would wear a button up probably most days of the week. Even when he's not at work, even when he's like at home relaxing, he's probably gonna wear a button up. And probably a pair of shoes like loafers or Oxfords or something that's like practical but also a little more formal. He would not wear a sneaker unless he was like hiking. If we stay in this family, there is also a younger sister. She's the youngest of the four. And she's still in college. She's really young. And because she's young, she doesn't have a lot of money. She doesn't own a lot of nice clothes. There's a lot of things that are thrifted and mismatched. She might even have a few like hand-me-downs from her older brothers. And I do mean that literally, like maybe she stole a t-shirt or two from her older brother. But I also think if you look at her style, you can kind of see the things she's adopted by watching her older siblings. And like, maybe she likes a vintage graphic tee like her brother Flynn. Maybe she likes a pair of trousers like her brother Declan. You can kind of see her like sampling these different identities of the people that she's looked up to her whole life. I also had to include a leather jacket in here. I really liked the idea that she would have like found a vintage thrifted leather jacket and that became like her prized possession. And even though she doesn't totally know what her style is yet, I think she's still ultimately like a very cool person. I wanted her to have this like cool energy, the confidence of the youngest sister to three older brothers. Like she knows how to hold her own in a room. She's very confident. She's very capable. She's very self-assured. She's just young. Now, I haven't talked about the other main character in this book yet, whose name is Molly. And her style, I think, is really interesting because it's kind of like split into these two different personalities. And she, in a lot of ways, is that kind of person. There's a side of her that's like really hyper-focused and driven and ambitious. And so you see her in a lot of like nice, tailored, classic things. Her style, a lot of the time, is very office appropriate because she works a lot of the time. She also, I will point out, she makes good money. So she's buying some very expensive, high quality, nice things. And that is very much like her philosophy. Like she works hard so that she can have nice things. But there's always like one element in her outfits that's like a little bit off or a little bit undone. Like her hair is always a little bit messy, or she's wearing jeans instead of trousers. And that was really important to me because the other half of her personality, the contrast to this like really ambitious, driven person, is that like her core, the person she is at home when she's not at work, is really like laid back and fun and kind of rough around the edges. She's the kind of person who would go to work and be like just meticulously organized and on top of everything, and then come home and like not wash the dishes for a few days and just like wear a pair of boxers around the house and not do her hair or brush her hair or anything. And so I really wanted her style to capture both of these states. She'd probably wear like a little workwear jacket or, like I said, a pair of boxers and like a men's sweater. She'd wear like slide sandals, like things that are super casual, a pair of like thick, chunky socks or like a Henley or things that are just like easy. And even in the outfits where she's a little bit more dressy in terms of like going out style, I wanted there to be this sense of like casualness. Like she's going to wear this like cute little red mini dress with a pair of sneakers or a slinky silk slip dress with a pair of flip-flops. Like there's always something just like a little casual. The one exception, I've included this outfit, which is obviously like very dressy, very sexy, very like feminine and very overtly nice. And this is for a specific moment in the book when she's going on a date and her heart isn't really in it. She has feelings for somebody else, but she's trying to like go through the motions and kind of put on this act of dating and like being desirable. And so you kind of see her overcorrecting, and it's almost a costume for her. Like, yeah, she's totally pulling it off, but it isn't her. It doesn't feel authentically like who she is, which makes sense because in that moment, she isn't acting in alignment with what she really wants. She's acting in a way that she thinks she's supposed to be acting. And so I wanted to have a moment where you see her style demonstrate that like performance aspect. And so in that way, I think we can also really use clothes to communicate when a character is behaving out of character. Now, obviously, like at this point that I'm sharing all of this with you, I have spent so much time thinking about these characters and developing these characters, but it obviously didn't start out that way. It started out with this like very vague concept of like, oh, it's a person who works a lot and is kind of rough around the edges the rest of the time. And then I had to flesh out all of these other details. But I did that in part by thinking about what she wears. And it's a very like iterative process for me. So I will add things to these boards just as I see them. And then occasionally I go back in and I review, and if there are things that feel like they are no longer applicable, I just delete them. And over time, over like months and months and months of doing this, kind of starts to crystallize around these very clear identities. Or if it doesn't, if I'm starting to see too many similarities, that's also a signal for me that I maybe need to like rethink some things, and I maybe need to understand more of what sets these characters apart from each other. And so it's this like constant feedback loop of collecting inspiration, refining my understanding and my idea, reflecting on that at a later date, seeing if everything still fits, going back and revising what I think I know, and just like repeating that. Hopefully that's interesting. If you are also writing a book, maybe it's a process, a technique you want to try. And if you do, let me know. I'd be curious to see if you find it helpful. Like I said, it's just a thing I started doing inadvertently, and I don't know of anybody else that does it. I'm sure some people must. But if you decide to try it, let me know, because this is honestly a topic I could talk about forever and ever and ever and ever and ever.